Welcome back to Study Through the Bible, the YouTube channel where we study the Bible in community here on YouTube, and we are going through the Psalms. And so last week we started a series covering Psalms 1 through 3, and we're going back to our old style where I give you assignments where you can read and focus in on a particular area of the text, and then we talk about that what we've been reading that whole week on Sundays. Today we're going to be in Psalms 4 through 8, and so that's what we've been working on this last week. And the theme here today is sweet release. And we're going to be focusing in on some heavy emotional characters. Let's go ahead and jump right in. And the first emotion that we come across is Psalm 4:2, and that is shame. And David says, "O men, how long shall my honor be turned into shame?" To give you a context, both the Old and New Testament was written within a context of an honor-shame culture. And that's something, if you're in the Western world, you're kind of maybe unfamiliar with, because we have more of a guilt and innocence culture. But in that makes it a lot more personal, right? So am I personally doing the right thing or the wrong thing? Am I guilty or am innocent? Have I paid my debt to society? All those kind of things. But in an honor-shame culture, which is still found in like a lot of Asian cultures today, as well as some other places in the world, is that you have what's right and wrong is more determined upon what brings honor or shame, not to you individually, but do your actions bring honor or shame to the whole? And so that whole can be your family unit, it can be the community in which you live, it can even be your nation, or it can be your God. Does it bring honor or shame to that picture? And so David is crying out and feeling shame. Now we're familiar with the concept of shame, and shame is kind of like when you start feeling like really down upon yourself and you start feeling really beat down. So here's 5 ways people shame themselves and how that affects their lives. They avoid relationships, vulnerability, and community. And then they suppress their emotions. They feel worthless, depressed, and anxious. They're less likely to take healthy risk, and they're more likely to relapse back into problem behaviors. Which is interesting because oftentimes we feel, and one of the reasons why we kind of beat up on ourselves is we feel like that's a proper way of showing remorse. And it's a good way for us. If I feel bad about what I did and I feel bad about myself, then it's going to keep me from doing the thing over again. And the actual opposite is true. And the reason is because you are in a place of insecurity, you're in a place of weakness, you're in a place of beating down on yourself. And that actually all points inward. It's inward focused. And so you're actually more likely to do selfish things and selfish behaviors because you're so focused in on yourself. And that's probably part of the problem that got you into a mess in the first place. And we're going to see a theme today, and why we call it sweet release is because the cure to all of these things, these negative emotions or negative expressions of emotions, I should say, is getting it out and getting it out in a healthy way. And so often we try and deal with things by just suppressing it and beating ourselves down and focusing inward. And that's not the way that a godly person or the Bible even recommends that we deal with things. And so the way out of shame is to actually do the opposite of your inclination. Your inclination when you feel shame is to be inward focused, and instead the cure is to actually get outside of yourself. And so you can do that by your tendency is to withdraw from people, and you intentionally seek out relationships, intentionally seek out that input from others and vulnerability and safe people. You move out of your head and into the open. So instead of going inward, you go outward. And then you develop self-compassion. So instead of beating yourself up, being insecure, you actually forgive yourself and you allow yourself to have a second chance. You take one small risk. You don't want to take it, but you force yourself to start taking this small risk and believe that healing is possible, that I can overcome this. I don't have to repeat the same mistakes. And so a first question that we have today is, are you more prone to be inward or outward focused? I would say for myself, I'm very much, my natural inclination is just to be in here in my own world and my own thoughts and what I'm working on, what I have to do, all of those types of things. And it often does get me in trouble. And so I have to continuously, consciously force myself to be outside of myself and to be thinking about other people and how my behaviors or what I'm doing is actually affecting other people around me. So how about you? I would love to hear in the comments down below. And so the next emotion, you can't see it, but joy. You can see it because she's on the screen, right? And we can all identify with joy. She's bright and cheery. And, David in Psalm 4:7 says, "You have put more joy in my heart than they have when their grain and wine abound." And so he's obviously talking about essentially the party scene, right? And so a celebration moment, a party, everybody's getting drunk, everybody's eating and, merry. So joy is often associated with certain things that we're doing, certain activities that we enjoy. It's kind of in the word, right? We enjoy doing. And so sometimes we kind of lose sight of like the simple things and even the very meaningful things that are in our life that bring us joy. And David is saying to the Lord, you bring me more joy than anything else, any other moment of revelry or celebration or excitement that I might experience. And there's actually a lot of songs that I noticed as I was going through these particular Psalm 4 through 8 that we were in this last week. And if you are a music lover, I would encourage you, as you read Psalms, to kind of keep a journal there. And anything as you're reading that sparks, like, hey, that reminds me of a lyric, or reminds me of a song, then jot it down. It's kind of a cool little way to do Easter egg hunting in the Bible. And then when you're done, you can go through and you can actually Google those and find those songs. And I found several songs actually that I did with this week. And Psalm 5:12 says, "For you bless the righteous, O Lord. You cover him with favor as with a shield." And that reminded me of lyrics from A Shield About Me. Psalm 8:1, "How majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set the glory above the heavens." And that's how majestic is your name. And then Psalm 8:3, very memorable lyrics. "When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place." That's almost straight out of "How Great Thou Art." And so right now, though, we're going to actually take a look at another song that I was reminded of as I read this voice. "You have put more joy in my heart than they have with their grain and their wine." So in order to appreciate this, I need you to kind of take yourself back to that moment years ago. And maybe not for all of you, but for a lot of us, when we were a kid, and if you had any exposure to church at all, then you had exposure to this song right here.
I've got the joy, 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 joy down in my heart. Where? Down in my heart. Where? Down in my heart. I've got the joy, 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 joy down in my heart. Where? Down in my heart to stay. And I'm so happy, so very happy. I've got the love of Jesus in my heart. And I'm so happy,
hope that took you back and gave you a little bit of joy in your life right now where you are. So what brings you joy? What are the things that bring you the most joy? Oftentimes, with all these other things, these maybe sometimes negative experiences or emotions that we feel that maybe weigh us down, it's important to remember, like the Bible says, a merry heart is good medicine. What brings you joy? So now we're going to deal with anger, and you definitely need joy to counteract anger. And so David says in Psalm 4:4, be angry and do not sin. Ponder in your own hearts on your beds and be silent. And then this is picked up on in the New Testament in Ephesians 4:26. He says, be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger and give no opportunity to the devil. In fact, that's not the only New Testament allusion to this group of Psalms. There were several that we found this week. Here's one, Psalm 5:9, for there's no truth in their mouth. Their inmost self is destruction. Their throat is an open grave. They flatter with their tongue. That's picked up by Paul in Romans 3 to talk about how we're all sinful and fall short of the glory of God. And then in Psalm 8:2, it says, out of the mouth of babies and infants, you have established strength because of your foes to still the enemy and the avenger. Picked up in Matthew in a moment where Jesus is welcoming the little ones to himself. And then Psalm 8:4, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the son of man that you care for him? Yet you have made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honor. You have given him dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under his feet. Picked up in Hebrews chapter 2. So there's three ways that we can deal with anger. And one is through expression. Okay, and we often think of this as a negative thing, like, when he says, in your anger don't sin, we often think of, well, the way that you sin is you express your anger, you let your anger out. But there's different ways in which you can let it out. And really, sometimes the best thing that you're supposed to do is let it out, because if the thing that you're angry about is really a justifiable anger, then depending upon the way in which you let it out, then it might be the best thing to do. It's the way that the situation is going to actually be addressed and dealt with, and the person has a chance to repent and acknowledge, confess, say I'm sorry, apologize, all of those different things. But not, I read something that said that, the temptation is that, everybody basically feels like they're justified when they're feeling angry. They all feel like it's righteous anger. But because we're sinful, they warned us and said, hey, righteous anger very often, almost all the time, eventually turns into unrighteous anger. So watch out for that feeling of like, well, I'm in the right and you're in the wrong, and so you need to know that I'm angry. But letting it out is sometimes the healthiest thing. It's just a matter of, are you letting it out in terms of like, hey, we really need to talk about this because this is making me angry, and maybe even realize I'm feeling very angry right now, and I may misrepresent, or may misword what I'm trying to get across. And so bear with me, and I really want to work this out with you. And so that can be a very helpful thing. Sometimes letting out means that you actually just get that anger out of your system by taking it out on something else. Hopefully that's not another person, right? But, that's why they have punching bags in the garage and things like that. That's why, like maybe even expressions of, like just doing something very physical in nature, exercise, great way to kind of get that out. Maybe, singing, venting, all of those types of things are very healthy ways, in fact, of letting anger out in a way that's not going to cause physical harm to another person or get you in a lot of trouble, right? So in your be angry, but don't sin. It's not the anger that's bad, it's the expression of anger that sometimes can be bad. And so expression is one way of dealing with anger. it's suppression, keeping your anger in. And this is the theme I want you to see, is that keeping things in and staying inward and being inward focused is always the worst way of dealing with your emotions or dealing with your situation. Suppression in this case is kind of like feeling like anger itself is the sin. And so we feel like, oh, I shouldn't be angry, and this is my problem if I'm angry, and I'm just going to internalize it, and I'm just going to kind of suck it in. But the problem with that is that anger does not just go away, right? That anger that you try and suppress and deny and ignore, that just builds up to the point where you just kind of tend to explode, kind of like our man on the screen here. And I remember I used to do this when I was younger, and I would finally just blow up. And my parents, what happens is that the thing that you blow up over isn't worth or merit the reaction that comes out of you. And so it just catches people by off guard, and they oftentimes react by making you feel insignificant and saying like, well, what are you so upset about? I only did this, right? And they focus on like how angry you're being instead of the fact that you are angry. And so that oftentimes doesn't work at all. Suppressing your anger and then exploding eventually, not a good thing. But then the third option is calming down and learning a lot of different techniques that would help you to be able to just kind of, okay, I de-escalate the situation. And sometimes this is the best first thing to do, and then going before you express it, okay? And this is before you go and deal with the thing that's making you angry. And Paul adds in there that make sure you do that, you take care of it now. Don't just deal with it later and say, oh, okay, I'll put that off and, like avoid it in the conflict and that kind of thing. Deal with it tonight, because it's going to hurt you. It's eventually going to hurt you and your body if you just try and ignore it. So now we're going to go on to sadness. And Psalm 6, 6 and 7, I am weary with my moaning. Every night I flood my bed with tears. I drench my couch with my weeping. My eye wastes away because of grief. So this is something that this sounds like, wow, how over the top kind of thing, like what is going on that he's just so sad that he's just drenching his bed with his tears. Here's the interesting thing. What you see in this verse and the psalmist David, the way he's dealing with his situation and his emotions, seems like on the surface, if you're just reading it or hearing it, like it's over the top, but it's actually the most healthiest thing that he can be doing. And so you see exhaustion, you see his sighs and growing, like, hey, what's wrong? Nothing. Right? Obviously there's something wrong, but they're just not talking about it. Tears and grief. Okay, that's what the psalmist says that he's experiencing, how he's letting his sadness out. And then what I looked up is healthy ways to deal with sadness, and what did I find? Cry is number one. Write poetry and listen to music. What is David doing? He is writing poetry that is set to music, and we call it the Psalms. I find that interesting. He's talking about crying. And so later on you find meditate, which the scripture calls us all the time to meditate on his word and meditate on good things and think about the good, think about the positive. That's Philippians 4, whatever's good, noble, and praiseworthy. Think on these things. Laugh. The Bible says that a merry heart is good medicine. Do what you enjoy. Talk to someone. Exercise. Be active and proactive. These are all things that the Bible would commend as a healthy way of dealing with your situation. And I found it interesting that David, even though it seems a little bit over the top, he's actually dealing with his sadness in a way that's very, very productive and in a good way to actually get out of it. And so then the last thing that we have today, of course, is Shiggaion, right? A Shiggaion of David. What in the world is Shiggaion? Well, I didn't know either, so I had to look it up. But one of the things that I found interesting in this section is the very first verse is kind of the preface. It's like kind of setting the stage, or the instructions that the psalmist wrote in there. And we find a lot of different variation in the way that these psalms were supposed to be expressed. And so Psalm 4 to the choir master, right? So he had a choir. Then you had Psalm 4:1, stringed instruments. So get out the string section, right? And then Psalm 5:1, the flutes, so the woodwind section. And then Psalm 6, according to the Sheminith, which another one is like, of course, the Sheminith, right? Well, the Sheminith is the lowest male vocal range, and so it's all you baritones. So you got actual like vocal ranges that are being referred to, and who's got this part to sing this part. And then you got according to the Gittith, which that one truly no one knows. It was an instrument in Gath. It was probably a stringed instrument, but nobody knows for sure what that instrument is. So I feel that if that's fair enough to fill in the blank. What do you think that instrument is? What's your favorite instrument? Throw it into the Psalms right there. I'm just kidding. But what in the world is a shiggaion? Well, a shiggaion is an emotional, like singing with emotion, an emotional outburst almost. And in some ways it's used, it actually has this connotation of being drunk. And that's probably because this has the connotation of you are going to be completely undignified. Like if somebody was watching you, and then they would feel like, oh my gosh, what is they doing? They're making a fool out of themselves. This is kind of thing that if you did in public, kind of like David did, right? David, when he got the Ark of the Covenant, he was so happy. He was dancing before the Lord, and he was dancing in skivvies, right? And he's the king of Israel. And his wife then, she says, oh, will the king be so undignified? And he says, look, I'm going to be even more undignified than this. And so that reminds me of another song that has that very name. So go ahead and check it out, and feel free to be undignified. If you know the song and you're singing along and you're in the privacy of your home, then go ahead and go for it.
I will dance, I will sing to be mad for my king. Nothing, Lord, is hindering the passion in my soul. I will dance, I will sing to be mad for my king. Nothing, Lord, is hindering the passion in my soul. I will dance, I will sing to be mad for my king. Nothing, Lord, is hindering the passion in my soul. I will dance, I will sing to be mad for my king. Nothing, Lord, is hindering the passion in my soul. And I'll become even more undignified than this. Some may say it's foolishness, but I'll become even more undignified than this. I will dance, I will sing to be mad for my king. Nothing, Lord, is hindering the passion in my soul. I will dance, I will sing to be mad for my king. Nothing, Lord, is hindering the passion in my soul. And I'll become even more undignified than this. Though some would say it's foolishness, but I'll become even more undignified than this. Leave my pride by my side, and I'll become even more undignified than this. Well, some would say it's foolishness, but I'll become even more undignified than this. Leave my pride by my side, yeah.
What's your favorite way to let it all out? I would encourage you, for me, it's really when no one else is around. If I'm in the car driving by myself, even if there's other people and they can see me when I'm in the car, it doesn't seem to matter. If I'm in the shower or if I have the house all to myself, rare thing because I have five people in my family. But for me, it's music. And so being able to, if I'm angry, put on angry music and just get it out. And if I'm sad, kind of just, deal with those emotions and kind of just let myself get those things out. Because like I said, I'm kind of very prone to keep it in and to be inside myself. And that's not always the best thing. And that we kind of saw that echoed in spades today by the psalmist and by all of these other expressions. The best thing to do with your emotions is to get them out in a healthy, productive way. And remember, you have a God who loves you and he cares for you and he's listening. He's waiting to hear from you. And so my question today, and are you more prone to be inward or outward focused? What brings you joy? And what is your favorite way to let it all out? And until next time, may God's grace be with you. Remember to click that subscribe button, those like buttons, that share button, all of those things, and check out some of my other videos. While you're at it, let other people know about this channel and leave a comment. All your questions, comments, something you want to challenge what I said, feel free to leave it all in the comments down below.